I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, I'm Tom Lochner, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We're excited to be a partner with Extension to bring you research-backed resources, tools, and tips to keep Wisconsin marshes productive and profitable.
And those are, as usual, if you've got questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask them directly or to type them into the chat. We go through questions with the presenters over the course of the presentation. There's also 10 minutes for questions at the end. We use the chat, and feel free to ask questions and answer them if you have answers as well. And that's kind of the basic housekeeping. We're going to have today Jed, mostly Jed, focus on weeds and pre-harvest intervals. Amaya Atucha is going to cover water content and soil moisture. And then Dave Jones is going to be giving us the what's going on and what's upcoming. But I want to offer it to Alex to give us a quick welcome from the Growers Association.
All right, thank you, Allison. So welcome to you all on behalf of WSCGA, and thank you for joining us today. Tom is out on vacation, so I will be filling in for him today. I know we're all looking forward to another great brown bag lineup, and I think today's content is going to be great with your current activities on the marsh. And I'd like to also thank Allison for her help in planning out these brown bags and then all the work she does behind the scenes to coordinate and run these sessions. It's been wonderful. And today is our final session of our growing season brown bags. We do have our mini clinics coming up next month during our field day on August 11th. And again, Allison is working hard behind the scenes. She's organizing a marsh tour at Whittlesey Cranberry and our lineup of speakers for the mini clinics. I can put a link in the chat for the notice that includes all the information about the field day and the registration form if you want to join us for the lunch. And coming up here in September and October, we'll be taking a break from these mini clinics for the harvest season. And we'll be back in November and December, and Allison will give a preview of those brown bags later in the meeting. The last item I have for today is a feedback survey that we would like you to take on these brown bag seminars. We'll put the link in the chat, and we'd love your input on what you like about these brown bags, what improvements, if any, you would suggest, and what topics you'd like to see in future sessions. And we will do a random drawing of the responses for one of our Wisconsin Cranberries hats. So you'll have the opportunity to either leave your response anonymous if you'd like, or you can enter in your name if you want to be in the drawing for the hat. So that's everything I have today, Allison.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And thanks as always to the Growers Association for helping us coordinate these, to the Education Committee for helping us kind of suss out what makes good topics for what times of year, and to all of you for joining us. So feel free to, again, ask questions and all of that. So Jed, if you're ready to unmute yourself, I can let you start diving into weeds and pre-harvest intervals.
Great, thanks, Allison. And you can jump right to the next slide, which I put in there as a reminder to introduce, if you could go up to the title slide, please. That'll remind me to introduce the key point here, which is to talk a little bit about selectivity. And that's a real challenge when it comes to post-emergent herbicides in cranberry. Pre-emergent, we get away with dormant applications when they're herbicides that are registered at that timing are safer to use. But the real challenge in the research that we've been conducting is to find herbicides that control the weeds post-emergent without injuring the cranberries excessively, as you see in one of our early screening trials from last year here. So I'm going to keep my comments really brief. I've been asked to talk about weeds and pre-harvest intervals. When it comes to the pre-harvest intervals, kind of snide way of putting it is, when in doubt, check the label. It could be a really short talk, but we'll talk a little more detail about the post-emergent options that you do have and how to use them in a way to gain that selectivity a little more, minimize the injury risk. Just to review those, we have Callisto, of course, Quinstar, but the MRL concerns still exist, and that limits most of our Quinstar use. It's still on target to have some resolution to those MRL issues in 2022, But just as a reminder, the Brexit piece has really upset the EU MRL approval process. So that could take a little bit longer than anticipated. We'll talk a little bit about the post-emergence graminicides, Select, Max, and Post. We'll touch on Stinger, again, one where we have marginal selectivity, and we'll talk about how to minimize risk. And then we'll clean up with the wiper applications, so traditional Weed R64 and Roundup. And then all of these, I'm using the common trade names, but obviously, as you know, there are many generic forms of several of these, like Roundup and clethodim or Select Max and Callisto. Next slide, please. And again, we'll move through pretty quickly because you're well acquainted with these. It's more a reminder of kind of some key points at this mid-season application timing. Let's start with Callisto. Well-established weeds, particularly those approaching flowering or seed production, they're often going to be injured. You get that satisfaction of turning the tops of them quite white, but they're not killed oftentimes at this time of year. And yesterday at the research station, I wish I had taken a picture of the slender-leaved or narrow-leaved goldenrod. It was quite satisfying to see the tops of it quite white. But as all of you know, and just a reminder, oftentimes it'll continue into reproduction and recover from that. So we're getting towards the late end of having good, effective control with Callisto on these weeds like the yellow loosestrife that's blooming out there right now, dewberry that's becoming even more established across the top of the canopy, and several other species. So the most common question we get at this time of year is that folks have applied 2 applications of Callisto, but maybe at quite reduced rates that would allow room in that seasonal maximum to have a 3rd application. That isn't allowed. It never will be in cranberry, unfortunately, because the residue tolerance, the amount of residue that your handler could accept in a food product, is based on the use pattern. And it's not known if the residue at harvest would exceed the tolerance if you were to apply it 3 times. The use pattern that was used to create the label was 2 applications. So if a 3rd were to go on, particularly as we approach that 45-day pre-harvest interval, we don't know if that would show as a flash in your profile or your screening as you get towards harvest. That's why we can't use 3 applications. And we've had questions about how much would it cost to go back and do that. It would be several $100,000 to do the residue trials for several years to be able to do that. So that's the reasoning behind that and the 45-day pre-harvest interval. Next slide, please, Allison. So let's talk a little bit about the post-emergent grass herbicides. I lump them together because they act very similarly. They block the same enzyme in the plant. And they control actively growing grasses primarily before tillering. And again, this is one where, yesterday I saw several grasses that are getting towards reproduction or in reproduction. Don't expect much with these herbicides, regardless of the pre-harvest interval, to be active on those established grasses. There are cases, we have one right now in a mint field of all crops, controlling some crabgrass that had gotten large. The Select Max was applied to it. That crabgrass has sat perfectly green for several weeks now, but it's actually dead. And to know that, what you do is to pull on the growing point. And the growing point would be the newest leaf. And down in that leaf, in the sheath, there's a little white portion where it's entered into the leaf below it. That's actually the growing point of the grass. And if you pull on that and it comes out easily, and that bottom white piece is starting to turn brown or is brown, the plant's actually dead. It remains green because there's no activity on the photosynthetic components like chlorophyll, but it's dead. The growing point has been killed down in the grass. And I mention that because sometimes it takes a few weeks for that to happen if the grass is more established. And unfortunately, I think sometimes people have made multiple applications shooting at a dead target. So maybe we can reduce some costs and time to be able to do that. Pre-harvest intervals, much longer for post. It's 60 days. Select Max and the other generics registered on Cranberry have a 30-day pre-harvest interval. Next slide, please. Thank you. So stinger, we still enjoy a Wisconsin only special local need, what we call a 24C label, specific to just Wisconsin cranberries. But you have to be willing to accept crop injury, and it will happen. It's any sort of contact with the cranberry vines, you could have some injury, but there are ways to minimize it. Apply at least 1 week after bloom. We certainly get much less injury from stinger in the post-bloom applications as opposed to the spring pre-bloom applications when the cranberries are growing very rapidly. Spot spray, I would never suggest a broadcast spray of stinger. First of all, it's horribly expensive, but it's just too much risk. Spot spray on target weeds, you could use it as a wiper application also if you have a real problematic area, and apply only to weeds it controls. Check out that label. We have a very specific list on there. Asters, it's really strong on the clovers. I think that's where it sees most use. And if you have a really rampant outbreak, maybe on the edges of the beds of goldenrod, you could wipe it and get some control. One key note here, Corteva AgriScience has introduced a new stinger formulation. It's called Stinger HL. Do not use it. It's not registered on cranberry, and it will cause excessive injury in any form. Why? The stinger that we do have is a 3-pound gallon, 3 pounds of active ingredient in a gallon. The Stinger HL is 5 pounds of active ingredient in the gallon. So if you think the injury is bad now, you could expect almost double in that case. And a relatively long pre-harvest interval of 50 days. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have the traditional wiper herbicides. We're not going to spend a lot of time here. I know how little most people like wiping, and therefore I won't antagonize you by talking about these traditional wipers too much. The Weedar 64 and the Roundup. Wiper application only. It'll kill or injure vines if they're contacted. And they can be tank mixed to broaden and improve your control. Just make sure you follow the label. Remember, there are about, over 100 different glyphosate products and labels, and they all have these little intricate differences. So just make sure you follow the label of the partner you choose with Weedar 64. And the most important part of that is most glyphosate products don't allow additional surfactant in wiping applications. And I found out more recently that part of the reason for that is because some of the adjuvants can cause the Roundup to foam excessively, and then it would drip out of the wiper. So it's not because it wasn't looked at, it's because there is some cause for concern there. Pre-harvest intervals, Weedar 64, 30 days, Roundup also, I put for that in-season wiper application. There are also some odd pieces on the Roundup label that allow for other uses in cranberry, but we don't use them at that timing, like spot spraying or pre-planting. Those have longer pre-harvest intervals, but that's not what we're talking about at this time of year. Next slide, please. And I'll just finish with one piece. Any new post-emergent herbicides coming along? Again, this is a gap in our weed control right now that we'd like to address by having more options. And we've been working for a couple of years on a very interesting active ingredient that has, as you can see here, this is from a current trial, has a lot of activity on a pretty broad spectrum of weeds. This active ingredient is tolerance or residue exempt. So we don't have to go through a registration process. We just have to show crop safety, and then the registrant would add it to the label. Of course, we have the MRL piece we also need to address. But right now we're working on that selectivity piece of trying to get the rate down low enough that it doesn't injure cranberries like we see in our plots right now, but that we can still control some really tough weeds like the maple you see here. I found out yesterday visiting with the product manager at the station that they actually have a new formulation. The formulation we're using this year has methylated seed oil as an adjuvant already in the package. They have a new one for us to use next year, specifically in cranberry with no adjuvants. So that'll allow us to reduce the risk of the adjuvant causing injury. So we're really looking forward to that. And I leave you with hope that there are some new options potentially coming your way at this kind of gap time of the year. And Allison, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Fantastic. I have not seen any questions come in yet, but thank you, Jed, for all of the review of all of our important this time of year options, and you know, of course, seeing a dead maple. Boy, is that exciting. We have still a few minutes before noon, or before 1, so just wanted to remind again that the summer field day in person again, Wednesday, August 11th at Whittlesey Cranberry Company. You know, it's a lovely operation. I've, as Alex said, enjoyed working with Robert to put the tour together. We also will have mini clinic presentations from Leslie, from Joshna, and so that'll be your first opportunity to meet them, you know, in person at these public events. From myself, and then Dave and Christina are going to be presenting as well. So the mini clinics, I believe, run 9:30 to 11:30 through that day, but the whole day. Alex, does it start at 9 proper, or at 8:30?
The event starts at 8:30 for registration and the trade show and the marsh tours and those items.
And yeah, I'm extremely looking forward to actually getting to face-to-face meet so many of you all at once. So deeply looking forward to it. And then we again will take off September and October from our education, you know, regular programming for harvest. Hopefully you will, there we go. And then our next brown bags will come back again in November. And I do already have the date set of November 19th and December 17th. It was popular last year when we had our nationwide roundup. And the thought was that we could have a West Coast roundup and an East Coast roundup for those November and December brown bags. As you get to hear from our Wisconsin experts all growing season long, checking in with the research and the new directions that people on the coasts are taking. And if you have particular researchers that you would like to hear from or topics that you're really curious about that's going on, please send me an email or send me a text and let me arrange the speaker lineup to be what's most interesting to you. So the prior information, I'm sure Alex has sent you several times, the August 11th at Whittlesey Cranberry and Cranmore, and then November 19th and December 17th are our next virtual brown bags of the season. We do at fruit.wisc.edu, there's an events calendar and the registration links are already live there. I will be setting up the speakers in the coming months, so happy to take direction on those fronts. It looks like we've had a couple more questions come into the chat, and as I wait for the chat to load, I'll again say, Alex made that nice survey that you can either do anonymously or you can add your name to get in the drawing for a Cranberries hat. We are, you know, always wanting to do better and have seen kind of participation is up sometimes and down other times, and we feel like the content's kind of, you know, hopefully very useful for you, but give us feedback on how we can make the content more useful, or if we need to change the timing, or what makes this best for your world. I kind of like the questions of a live session as opposed to a podcast, but if podcast availability is better, you know, give us your thoughts. We want to make things as good as possible. And maybe these chats will load.
Did you see that last question about the best timing for fall post-harvest moss control applications?
Alex, this is Jed. It looks like maybe Allison, I'm not sure if her audio is working, but I'll jump in and just try to answer that. So the timing is really rather fluid and you know, a wider window than what we would have for most pests in that case. But there are a couple of key things to keep in mind. Number one, anything that you're doing to control a plant needs to control a plant that's active in growth. So something that's dormant or no longer growing, don't expect to control it. The other key piece though really is that most of these are just kind of a temporary suppression. We have not found anything that gives long-term moss control. So whatever one chooses to apply, just keep in mind that it's likely, should we get into wetter conditions, that it'll persist and regrow. But the actual application timing itself, you know, this is, moss grows slowly and it's been around for a while when it's there. So it has a fairly broad window in that case. Actively growing, and again, set your expectations reasonably. It'll be back.
Thank you, Jen. All right, Allison, we can see you and hear you again. I think that we have gotten through all of the presentations and addressed all of the questions in the chat.